famous faces of the 20th century. We're going to try and understand the really complex and often contradictory man behind the myth, Ernesto Che Guevara. All right, let's get into it.
You've seen this face. I mean, it's everywhere, right? It's become this huge symbol of rebellion and idealism. But that one image, it hides a way more complicated story of a doctor, a guerrilla fighter, a state executioner, and, honestly, a pretty failed administrator. So, who was he, for real?
To get the revolutionary, you really have to start with the boy. See, his whole personality was basically forged by two major forces: a lifelong illness and a journey that completely changed his world.
From the time he was a little kid, Guevara was battling this severe, violently acute asthma. So his personality wasn't shaped by an easy life of privilege. No, it was shaped by a constant, fierce struggle just to take a breath. And that fight, it made him believe that you could overcome any obstacle with just sheer force of will.
This line, it's from a farewell letter he wrote to his parents in 1965, and it tells you so much. He didn't see his illness as just a weakness. He actually framed it as the very thing that sharpened his willpower, turning his body's limits into this source of defiant strength. So while he was a medical student, he takes this incredible 8-month motorcycle trip all across South America. And what he saw, the poverty, the exploitation of workers, it completely radicalized him. Then, a little later, he's in Guatemala, and he actually witnesses a CIA-backed coup overthrow a democratically elected president. Well, that sealed the deal. It cemented his lifelong hatred for the United States and turned this kind of wandering idealist into a committed Marxist. And that brings us to the next chapter of his life. The rebel now had his ideology. He just needed a revolution to join, and he was about to find it in Cuba. So in 1955, he bumps into this young Cuban lawyer, a revolutionary named Fidel Castro. Castro's planning to invade Cuba and overthrow the dictator there. Guevara, this doctor from Argentina, signs on almost instantly. He later wrote, "By the small hours of that night, I had become one of the future expeditionaries." He was all in. And from there, his rise was just meteoric. He survived this disastrous initial landing where almost all the rebels were killed. In the mountains, he proved he was this incredibly disciplined and ruthless fighter, and he earned Castro's total trust. He was actually the very first person Castro promoted to Comandante, and his victory at the Battle of Santa Clara, that was the final military blow that won the war. But what happens after the fight is over? The brilliant guerrilla fighter was now in a position of power, and this is where the central contradiction of Che Guevara's life really comes into focus. His first major role was to oversee the notorious La Cabaña prison. And between 1959 and 1963, it's estimated that somewhere around 500 people were executed there under his command. Some sources also allege that he took a very personal interest in the interrogations and torture of political prisoners. Then, as head of the National Bank and Minister of Industries, Che pushed this radical vision. He believed in creating what he called a new man. A citizen who wasn't motivated by money, but by moral duty and selfless sacrifice for the greater good. And he led by example, working volunteer shifts on his days off, cutting sugarcane alongside everyone else. But just look at the difference between that ideal and the reality. His policies, getting rid of material incentives, nationalizing industries, they led to an absolute disaster. By 1963, a CIA report concluded that Che had basically brought the Cuban economy to its lowest point since the revolution, with massive shortages and rationing everywhere. So, as you can imagine, he got more and more disillusioned with Cuba's dependence on the Soviet Union, and he was frustrated with his own failures in government. So Che became obsessed with a new goal: exporting the Cuban model of revolution all around the world. In 1965, he goes in secret to the Congo to train anti-government rebels. The whole mission was a complete and utter failure. In fact, his own diary from that time, which he called a history of a failure, tells you everything you need to know. I mean, the reality he found was just chaos. The local fighters were disorganized. They literally believed magic charms would make them immune to bullets. Their leaders were never around, their weapons were faulty, and the local people wanted nothing to do with them. It was humiliating, and he was forced to flee. But Che was nothing if not determined. He decided to try again. This time, he went to Bolivia, hoping he could create another Sierra Maestra right there in the Andes. This would be his final campaign. And this photo, wow, it really captures just how weak and isolated he'd become. The whole mission just collapsed, and fast.
The local peasants didn't support him, and pretty soon he was being hunted by US-trained Bolivian special forces. He was starving, suffering from a severe asthma attack, and his force had shrunk to just a handful of men. He was captured and then executed the very next day.
So, this brings us to the biggest question of all, right? How did this man, a man whose final revolutionary campaigns were total, abject failures, become one of the most enduring icons of the modern world?
Well, his legacy is just a masterclass in contradictions. You have the idealist who dreamed of a selfless new world, and he was also the ruthless enforcer who killed for it. You have the dedicated worker who inspired millions, who was also the terrible manager who wrecked an entire economy. Both of these men were Che Guevara. And the answer really lies in the incredible power of a single image. This photograph, taken by Alberto Corda way back in 1960, it just captured this moment of intense, defiant passion. After Che died, that image got simplified, it got stripped of all its context, and it became a blank canvas for rebellion, a universal symbol for anyone fighting the system.
So the face on the t-shirt isn't the man. Not really. It's the myth. And it leaves us with one last question to think about. What is it about our culture that lets us erase the complicated and often brutal history of a real person in favor of a simple, powerful, and timeless symbol?